Rain poured down in sheets, blurring the neon lights of the city that reflected off the wet pavement. Peter, a struggling taxi driver, tightened his grip on the steering wheel, eyes scanning the desolate streets. His heart ached with the weight of unfulfilled dreams when suddenly he spotted a woman and her child huddled under a flickering streetlight, their desperation almost palpable. Little did he know, this encounter would be the catalyst for a series of life-altering events. Peter sat hunched over the steering wheel of his aging taxi, watching the rain pummel the windshield in rhythmic waves. The wipers swung back and forth, fighting a losing battle against the relentless downpour. It was a dreary, late November evening, and the city seemed to have retreated into the warmth of its homes, leaving the streets eerily quiet. The glow from the neon signs above the storefronts reflected off the slick asphalt, casting a kaleidoscope of colors that seemed to dance in the puddles. For Peter, the night shift was both a blessing and a curse. It offered a respite from the cacophony of the day, but it also meant longer hours, fewer passengers, and more time alone with his thoughts. He rubbed his weary eyes, feeling the familiar weight of exhaustion settle over him like a heavy cloak. Each day bled into the next, a monotonous cycle of picking up fares and navigating through the labyrinthine streets of the city. It was a far cry from the life he had once envisioned for himself. Years ago, Peter had been a promising musician, his heart set on making a name for himself in the vibrant music scene. But dreams, he had learned, were fragile things, easily shattered by the harsh realities of life. A few missed opportunities, a string of bad luck, and the seductive pull of financial stability had led him away from the world of melodies and into the driver's seat of a taxi. The taxi had become his sanctuary, a place where he could retreat from the world, yet it also served as a constant reminder of the life he had left behind. He often wondered what his mother would say if she could see him now, eking out a living one fare at a time, his guitar gathering dust in the corner of his cramped apartment. Her death had left a void in his life that he couldn't seem to fill, a chasm that echoed with unresolved conversations and unspoken words. Peter's mother had always been a beacon of hope and kindness in his life, her gentle spirit a stark contrast to his gruff demeanor. She had taught him that compassion was a strength, not a weakness, and that even the smallest acts of kindness could have profound effects. But in the years since her passing, Peter had found it increasingly difficult to live by her teachings. The world, it seemed, was an unforgiving place, and he had learned to guard his heart against disappointment. As he drove through the near-deserted streets, Peter couldn't shake the feeling of discontent that had settled over him. The city, with all its vibrant energy and endless possibilities, felt like a distant dream, tantalizingly out of reach. His life had become a series of transactions, brief encounters with strangers who flitted in and out of his taxi, leaving behind only the faint scent of their presence. He sighed, turning the corner onto a dimly lit street lined with shuttered shops and darkened windows. The rain showed no sign of letting up, drumming a relentless beat on the roof of the car. Peter glanced at the clock on the dashboard. It was past midnight, and he had yet to make enough to cover the day's expenses. A flash of movement caught his eye, drawing his attention to the sidewalk ahead. Under the flickering glow of a street lamp, a woman stood huddled against the rain, clutching a small child to her chest. Their figures were partially obscured by the shadows, but even from a distance, Peter could sense their desperation, a silent plea for help that pierced through the night. He hesitated for a moment, his instinct urging him to keep driving, to stay cocooned in the isolation of his taxi. But something deeper, more intrinsic, compelled him to stop. Perhaps it was his mother's voice echoing in his mind, a gentle reminder that kindness, even in its simplest form, was never wasted. Peter pulled over to the curb, rolling down the window to call out to them. "Need a ride?" he asked, his voice carrying over the sound of the rain. The woman looked up, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of relief and apprehension. She nodded, shifting the child in her arms as she approached the car. "We missed the last bus," she explained, her voice barely audible above the downpour. "I didn't know what else to do." "Hop in," Peter said, unlocking the doors. The woman climbed into the back seat, settling the child beside her. The little girl, no more than 5 or 6, shivered beneath a threadbare coat, her eyes wide with a mixture of curiosity and fatigue. Peter adjusted the rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of the woman's face. Her features were soft and expressive, though etched with lines of worry and exhaustion. Her clothes were soaked, and her hair clung to her forehead in damp strands. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice carrying a genuine warmth that was rare in Peter's world. "I wasn't sure anyone would stop." Peter shrugged, trying to mask the flicker of empathy that had stirred within him. "Just doing my job," he replied gruffly, though he knew it was more than that. The woman gave him an address, and Peter nodded, pulling away from the curb. The city blurred past them, a haze of rain and neon lights as they drove in silence. The rhythmic rumble of the engine filled the car, a comforting counterpoint to the storm outside. As they neared their destination, the woman fumbled with her purse, her fingers trembling slightly. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice tinged with embarrassment. "I must have left my wallet at home." Peter glanced at her in the mirror, taking in the flush of color that crept up her cheeks. He hesitated, the familiar weight of financial worry pressing down on him. Yet, in that moment, he found himself remembering his mother's words, the lessons she had tried so hard to impart. "It's okay," he said finally, offering her a small, reassuring smile. "No charge. Just take care of yourself and your little one." The relief that washed over her was palpable, and she offered him a grateful smile that seemed to light up the dim interior of the taxi. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice filled with sincerity. As they pulled up in front of an old brick building, the woman gathered her child and prepared to leave. She paused, turning back to Peter with a look of earnest gratitude. "You've been very kind. I won't forget this." Peter nodded, watching as they disappeared into the building. A strange sense of fulfillment lingered in his chest, a warmth that was both unfamiliar and comforting. As he drove away, he couldn't help but wonder if perhaps, just perhaps, his mother had been right all along. The rain fell relentlessly, a rhythmic drumming against the windshield of Peter's aging taxi. Each drop seemed to echo the thud of his heart, a constant reminder of the life he was barely holding together. As he squinted through the blur of city lights, a pair of figures caught his attention, an island of stillness amidst the storm. A woman, her hair plastered to her face, clung to the hand of a child, their forms huddled beneath the inadequate shelter of a flickering streetlight. Peter felt a tug, an unspoken call to pause the meter of his life for just a moment. He eased the cab to a stop, the tires splashing through puddles as he pulled over. The woman's eyes met his through the rain-streaked window, a silent plea embedded in their depths. Rolling down the window, Peter leaned over and called out, his voice carrying over the hiss of the rain. "Need a ride?" The woman hesitated, glancing down at the child, whose small face was partially obscured by a bright yellow raincoat. Her voice came soft but edged with desperation. "We missed our bus. I didn't know what else to do." "Get in," Peter said, unlocking the doors with a click that seemed to break the spell of the downpour. They clambered into the back seat, the woman murmuring apologies as she settled her child beside her. The warmth inside the taxi enveloped them, and Peter caught a glimpse of the woman's face in the rearview mirror. Tired, yes, but resilient, with an underlying kindness that resonated with something deep within him. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm Claire, by the way. This is Emily." Peter nodded, offering a small, reassuring smile. "I'm Peter. Where to?" She rattled off an address, one that Peter recognized as being across town. Without another word, he merged back into traffic, the wipers working furiously to keep the windshield clear. The ride was silent, punctuated only by the soft hum of the engine and the occasional splash of cars passing by. Claire sat with her arm around Emily, who had fallen asleep, a small hand clutching a worn-out teddy bear. Peter couldn't help but feel a pang of empathy. He knew what it was like to feel adrift, to be at the mercy of forces beyond your control. As they reached their destination, the woman fumbled with her purse, her fingers trembling slightly. "I'm so sorry," she began, her voice faltering. "I must have left my wallet at home. I didn't mean to." Peter interrupted, waving a hand dismissively. "Don't worry about it. It's on the house. Just get inside and dry off, okay?" Claire looked up, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how to repay you." Peter shrugged, offering her a lopsided grin. "Just take care of yourself and your little one. That's thanks enough." As Claire and Emily disappeared into the building, Peter felt a warmth spread through him, a flicker of something he hadn't felt in a long time. It was a simple gesture, perhaps insignificant in the grand scheme of things, but it had rekindled a spark of humanity within him. As he drove away, the rain seemed to lighten, and for the first time that night, Peter felt a glimmer of hope. As the night wore on, the rain showed no signs of letting up, drumming steadily against the windshield as Peter navigated the slick streets back toward the heart of the city. The rhythmic swish of the windshield wipers was the only sound in the cab, a monotonous metronome ticking away the minutes. Yet, despite the dreariness of the night, something inside Peter felt different. The encounter with the woman and her child lingered in his mind, like a melody that refused to fade. He replayed the scene in his head, the woman's kind eyes, the way she had clutched her child protectively, the relief that had washed over her face when he refused her payment. Their gratitude had been genuine, a small spark in a world that could often feel so cold and indifferent. For a fleeting moment, Peter had felt something he hadn't in a long time, a sense of purpose, a connection to another human being. But as the night grew later, reality crept back in. The meter ticked with every mile, a grim reminder of the bills that awaited him. Rent was due, the electricity bill loomed, and the ever-present shadow of debt threatened to swallow him whole. He couldn't afford to be charitable, not with his finances hanging by a thread. Yet, despite himself, he couldn't help but feel that his mother would have been proud. She had always believed in the power of kindness, even when life had been hard on them. Back in his small, cluttered apartment, Peter pushed open the door and was greeted by the familiar chaos. Stacks of unopened letters littered the table, each one a reminder of the obligations pressing down on him. He shrugged off his damp jacket and sank into the worn armchair by the window, the city lights casting a soft glow through the rain-streaked glass. He felt the weight of exhaustion settle over him, but his mind refused to quiet down. As he sat there, the memory of his mother's voice echoed in his thoughts. "Kindness is never wasted, Peter," she would say, her eyes crinkling at the corners with warmth and wisdom. "It finds a way back to you." He wished he could believe it now, but the certainty of youth had long since eroded, leaving him with the skepticism born of too many disappointments. Peter's gaze drifted to the small framed photograph on the mantelpiece, his mother, smiling that familiar, reassuring smile. He reached over, tracing the outline of the frame with his finger, and felt a pang of longing. She had always been the guiding light in his life, her unwavering belief in the goodness of people a beacon during the darkest times. Without her, the world seemed a little more daunting, a little less forgiving. Finally, fatigue won over, and Peter dragged himself to bed, the sheets cool against his skin. Despite his tiredness, sleep was elusive, his mind a whirl of thoughts and what-ifs. He closed his eyes, hoping for rest, but dreams came instead. Vivid, haunting dreams of missed opportunities and the ever-looming fear of an uncertain future. In his dream, he was on stage, guitar in hand, the spotlight a blinding white against the darkness of the auditorium. He could feel the weight of the moment, the anticipation of the crowd, but when he strummed the strings, no sound emerged. Panic bubbled up, the audience's murmur growing into a roar of disapproval. Then, just as quickly, the scene shifted, and he was back in his taxi, the meter ticking relentlessly, reminding him of the burdens he could never seem to shake. Peter awoke with a start, heart pounding, the remnants of the dream fading slowly. Morning light filtered through the curtains, casting long shadows across the room. He lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, trying to shake the unease that clung to him. It was just a dream, he told himself, but the fear it had stirred felt all too real. Determined to make a fresh start, Peter rose and went about his morning routine, each task a step toward reclaiming normalcy. The smell of coffee filled the small kitchen, a comforting aroma that reminded him of simpler times. As he sipped the steaming mug, he glanced at the newspaper, but the words blurred together, his mind elsewhere. The woman's words echoed in his mind. "I'm so sorry. I must have left my wallet at home." The vulnerability in her voice had struck a chord with him, a reminder of the fragile thread that connected them all. He wondered about her story, what circumstances had led her to that streetlight on a rain-soaked night. He hoped she and her child were safe, that they had found warmth and shelter. Later, as he prepared to head back out for another shift, Peter paused by the photograph of his mother. "I hope you're right, Mom," he murmured, a silent prayer for guidance. He slipped the picture into his pocket, feeling its comforting presence close to him. The day passed in a blur of passengers and traffic, the city a cacophony of sights and sounds. Each fare was a step toward meeting his financial obligations, yet the interaction with the woman and her child lingered at the back of his mind, a persistent reminder of the impact of a single act of kindness. As dusk fell, Peter found himself drawn back to the place where he had encountered them. The streetlight still flickered, casting a warm glow on the pavement. He sat there for a moment, engine idling, as if waiting for something he couldn't quite name. Perhaps it was closure, or maybe a sign that his mother's words held the truth he so desperately needed to believe in. The city began to stir to life for the night, and reluctantly, Peter pulled away, the night shift stretching out before him like an endless road. But as he drove, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted within him. The weight of his struggles remained, but there was a new sense of resolve, a whisper of hope carried on the wind. In the quiet of the night, beneath the hum of the city, Peter found himself humming a tune, a melody that had been dormant for too long. It was a simple song, one he'd composed years ago when the world had seemed full of possibilities. The notes came easily, flowing through him like water, and for a moment he allowed himself to dream again. Perhaps his mother had been right after all. Kindness, though small and seemingly insignificant, had a way of rippling through the world, touching lives in ways he couldn't begin to imagine. As the night wore on, Peter resolved to hold on to that belief, to let it guide him through the uncertainty and into the light of a new dawn. The phone call came unexpectedly, cutting through the silence of Peter's small apartment like a beacon of hope. He was in the middle of his usual routine, struggling to balance his checkbook under the dim light of a single bulb, when the phone rang. Peter hesitated for a moment, his mind racing through the possibilities. Another bill collector, perhaps, or maybe a wrong number, but something compelled him to pick up. "Hello," he answered, his voice tinged with caution. "Good evening. Am I speaking with Mr. Peter Collins?" The voice on the other end was polished, each word carefully enunciated. "Yes, this is Peter," he replied, curiosity piqued. "My name is Jonathan Edwards. I represent the Hamilton family. They would like to express their gratitude for your kindness the other night." Peter's heart skipped a beat. The memory of the rain-soaked woman and her child flashed in his mind. "Oh, it was nothing, really. Anyone would have done the same," he stammered, caught off guard by the formal tone and unexpected recognition. "Nevertheless, they'd like to invite you to a meeting. If you're available tomorrow, we could arrange transportation for you." Peter's mind whirled with questions. Who were these people? Why did they want to meet him? Yet, the allure of something, he wasn't sure what, drew him in. "Yes, I suppose I can make it," he agreed, his curiosity outweighing his apprehension. The next morning, a sleek black car pulled up outside his apartment, starkly contrasting the worn-out taxis he drove daily. As he settled into the plush back seat, Peter couldn't help but feel like an imposter in someone else's life. The car glided through the city streets, finally arriving at an imposing glass skyscraper that seemed to touch the clouds. Inside, the lobby buzzed with activity, the air filled with the hum of conversation and the click of heels on polished marble floors. Peter followed the receptionist's directions to a private elevator that whisked him upwards, depositing him in a quiet, opulent hallway lined with abstract art. He was led into a spacious office, the walls lined with bookshelves and floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a panoramic view of the city. Behind a grand desk sat Claire, the woman whose life he had intersected in such an unexpected way. Today, she was a vision of poise and confidence, a far cry from the drenched figure he had encountered. "Peter," she greeted him warmly, rising to shake his hand. "I'm so glad you could come." "Thank you for inviting me," Peter replied, his voice betraying a mix of anxiety and intrigue. "I have to admit, I wasn't expecting any of this. Claire smiled, gesturing for him to sit. I can imagine. Let me explain. My family and I were deeply moved by your kindness. In a world where such gestures are rare, you showed us that compassion still exists. Peter shifted in his seat, the sincerity in her voice making him uncomfortable. I didn't do anything special, he insisted, heat rising to his cheeks. You did more than you know, Claire replied, her eyes softening as she spoke. And we'd like to offer you something in return. My father is expanding his company and believes someone with your character would be a valuable addition to our team. Peter's thoughts tumbled over each other. A job? Here? It seemed too good to be true. I don't have any business experience, he confessed, doubt creeping into his voice. We're not looking for experience, Peter. We're looking for integrity and a willingness to learn. You have both, Claire assured him. For a moment, Peter sat in silence, grappling with the magnitude of the offer. He thought of his mother, of her unwavering belief in kindness and its unforeseen rewards. In Claire's eyes, he saw a chance to honor that belief, to rewrite his story. With a deep breath, Peter nodded. I'd like to try. Claire beamed, her smile reflecting the promise of new beginnings. Welcome aboard, Peter. As he left the office, the weight of his old life began to lift, replaced by the exhilarating possibility of the new. In the heart of the city, Peter had found an unexpected ally in kindness, a testament to the fact that sometimes the simplest acts could lead to the most profound changes. Peter stood outside the imposing glass building, its sleek, mirrored surface reflecting the bustling city around him. Despite the drizzle and the chill that cut through his worn jacket, sweat beaded on his forehead. He adjusted his cap, a nervous habit, and took a deep breath before stepping through the revolving doors. The lobby was a world away from the cramped confines of his taxi. Polished marble floors gleamed under bright lights, and the air was filled with a subtle, expensive fragrance. As he approached the reception desk, Peter's heart pounded. He felt out of place, a scruffy outsider in a realm of tailored suits and confident strides. The receptionist, a young man with meticulously styled hair, greeted him with a professional smile. Good morning, sir. How can I assist you? I'm here to see Claire, Peter replied, his voice betraying a hint of uncertainty. The receptionist nodded, checking a list before confirming. Mr. Langley, Claire is expecting you. Please take the elevator to the 22nd floor. Peter nodded, muttering his thanks as he headed towards the elevators. Inside, he caught a glimpse of himself in the mirrored walls. Unkempt hair, a jacket that had seen better days, and shoes that were more scuffed than polished. A pang of self-doubt gnawed at him. What was he doing here? Was this really the opportunity he had been waiting for, or just another setup for disappointment? The elevator doors opened to reveal a bright, airy office space. Peter took a tentative step out, his eyes scanning the room until they settled on Claire. She stood by a large window, her silhouette outlined against the cityscape. The sight of her filled him with a strange mix of relief and apprehension. Peter, Claire greeted warmly, extending her hand. Her demeanor was markedly different from the drenched, desperate figure he had picked up days ago. Now, she exuded confidence and grace. I'm so glad you came. Peter shook her hand, his grip firm, but his voice still unsure. Thank you for inviting me. I have to admit, I'm still a bit overwhelmed by all this. Claire smiled, gesturing for him to sit. I understand. It must be quite a change, and I really appreciate you being here. My family and I were very moved by what you did for us. It's not every day you encounter such kindness, especially when nothing is expected in return. Peter shifted in his seat, feeling a mix of pride and embarrassment. It was nothing, really, just the right thing to do. Claire's expression softened. That's precisely why we wanted to meet you. My father, as you might know, is quite influential in the business world. When I told him about what happened, he was insistent on meeting you himself. Peter's eyes widened. Meeting Claire was one thing, but her father? Why would he want to meet me? Because he believes in rewarding genuine kindness. He's arranged for you to have a position in one of his companies. It's more than just a job, Peter. It's a chance to change your life. The weight of her words hung in the air, thick with possibility. Peter's mind raced, grappling with the enormity of the offer. A job, no, a career, was being handed to him. A lifeline thrown when he had least expected it. Yet skepticism lingered. Life had taught him that good fortune often came with strings attached. I appreciate the offer, Claire, I really do. But why me? There must be dozens of people more qualified, more deserving. Claire leaned forward, her gaze steady and sincere. Because you didn't ask for anything in return. You helped us without knowing who we were, without thinking of what you might gain. That's rare, Peter, and it's something my father values deeply. Peter sat back, digesting her words. The sincerity in her eyes was undeniable, but still doubt gnawed at him. And what if I'm not cut out for it? I've been driving a taxi for years. I'm not sure I know how to do anything else. Claire smiled, a reassuring warmth in her expression. Everyone has to start somewhere. You have the heart and the integrity, and those are qualities you can't teach. The rest, well, that can be learned. My father is willing to provide whatever training you need. A silence fell between them, filled with the unspoken weight of Peter's decision. This was a moment that could redefine his life, a chance to step out of the shadows of his past and into a future brimming with potential. He thought of his mother, her voice echoing in his mind, reminding him that kindness was never wasted. He thought of the struggles, the nights spent worrying about the next rent payment, the relentless grind of making ends meet. And he thought of Claire, a stranger who had turned into a beacon of hope. With a deep breath, Peter looked up, meeting Claire's gaze with newfound resolve. "All right," he said, his voice steady. "I'll do it. I'll take the job." Claire's face broke into a wide smile. "I'm so glad to hear that, Peter. Welcome aboard." As they shook hands, a sense of calm settled over Peter. The decision felt right, a step towards something greater, a chance to honor his mother's memory and to build a life she would have been proud of. The meeting with Claire's father was a formality, yet it left a lasting impression. The man was as formidable as his reputation suggested, yet his warmth was genuine, his appreciation for Peter's act of kindness evident in every word. In the weeks that followed, Peter found himself immersed in a world that was both daunting and exhilarating. The learning curve was steep, but he embraced each challenge, driven by the promise of a better life. Slowly, the financial burdens that had once weighed him down began to lift, replaced by a sense of stability and purpose. Peter's transformation was not just professional, but deeply personal. The act of kindness he had extended to Claire and her child had set off a ripple effect, one that reached far beyond his immediate circumstances. It had taught him the power of compassion, the importance of helping others without expectation, and the profound impact such gestures could have. Sitting in his modest yet comfortable new office, Peter placed a photograph of his mother on the desk, a silent testament to the journey he had undertaken. He knew that life was unpredictable, filled with challenges and uncertainties, but he also knew that a single act of kindness could change everything. And as he looked out at the city, vibrant and alive with possibilities, Peter understood that his story was just beginning. He was no longer the struggling taxi driver, but a man who had discovered the true value of kindness, and with it, the power to transform lives, including his own. In the months that followed Peter's serendipitous encounter with Claire, his life underwent a remarkable transformation. Gone were the relentless pressures of mounting bills and the monotonous grind of late-night taxi shifts. In their place, a newfound stability and sense of purpose took root, reshaping the landscape of his existence. Peter's mornings now began with a sense of anticipation rather than dread. He would rise with the sun, the gentle light filtering through his modest apartment, casting golden patterns across the walls. His once cluttered space had become a sanctuary, tidy and inviting, mirroring the changes within him. The photograph of his mother, her gentle smile, a perpetual source of encouragement, occupied a place of honor on his desk, a constant reminder of the values she had instilled in him. At the office, Peter thrived in his new role. The position Claire's family had offered him was not merely a job, but an opportunity to grow and contribute meaningfully. Surrounded by colleagues who respected his input, Peter found himself valued not only for his work ethic, but also for his innate compassion and ability to connect with others. It was as if the barriers that had once held him back had dissolved, allowing his true self to emerge. His relationship with Claire had also blossomed. What began as a simple gesture of gratitude had evolved into a genuine friendship. They often met for lunch, their conversations spanning everything from business strategies to music, a shared passion that reignited Peter's dormant dreams. Claire encouraged him to pick up his guitar once more, and on quiet evenings, Peter would strum the strings, his apartment filled with melodies that spoke of hope and renewal. One afternoon, Claire stopped by Peter's office, her presence a burst of energy in the corporate setting. "Peter," she began, her eyes sparkling with enthusiasm, "I've been thinking about your music. There's a charity event my family is hosting next month, and I'd love for you to perform." Peter hesitated, the old doubts briefly resurfacing. "I haven't played in front of an audience in years, Claire." She placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "Your music has heart, Peter, just like your kindness that night. It deserves to be heard." Inspired by Claire's unwavering belief in him, Peter agreed. As the event approached, he practiced diligently, rediscovering the joy and freedom that music had always brought him. On the night of the performance, as he stood on stage, the audience's anticipation palpable, Peter felt a familiar rush of adrenaline. With a deep breath, he began to play, the notes flowing effortlessly, telling a story of resilience and hope. The audience was captivated, their applause thunderous, and in that moment, Peter realized that his journey had come full circle. The simple act of kindness he had extended months ago had not only altered his path, but had also reawakened his dreams. Back in his office, the responsibilities of his role brought him immense satisfaction. Peter had found ways to integrate his love for music into his work, organizing company events that fostered community and creativity. His colleagues admired his initiative, and under his guidance, the workplace became a hub of innovation and camaraderie. Yet, Peter's transformation extended beyond professional success. With newfound security, he had begun volunteering, using his spare time to drive for a local charity that provided transportation for those in need. Each ride reminded him of the night when a simple gesture had changed everything, reinforcing his belief in the power of compassion. It was during one of these volunteer shifts that Peter encountered a young man struggling to make ends meet. The man's story mirrored Peter's own past, a reminder of how far he had come. After ensuring the young man reached his destination safely, Peter discreetly left behind an envelope with enough money to ease the immediate burdens. As he drove away, the city lights reflecting off the windshield, Peter felt a profound sense of fulfillment. He understood now that acts of kindness, no matter how small, could set off ripples that extended far beyond their origin. His mother had been right all along. Kindness was never wasted. Returning home that evening, Peter paused to gaze at the photograph of his mother. Her smile seemed to convey pride and understanding. "Thank you," he whispered, acknowledging the wisdom she had imparted and the role it had played in shaping his journey. Peter's story was not just one of personal redemption, but also a testament to the enduring impact of empathy and connection. Through the challenges and triumphs, he had discovered a truth that transcended his circumstances, that every life, no matter how seemingly ordinary, held the potential for extraordinary change. In the quiet moments, as Peter sat with his guitar, the familiar chords resonating in the air, he felt at peace. His life, once filled with uncertainty, was now anchored by purpose and the promise of new beginnings. And in his heart, he carried the unshakable belief that kindness, given freely, would always find its way back, transforming lives and lighting the way forward. As the final chords faded, Peter knew that this was only the beginning. His story, like his music, had the power to inspire and uplift, a reminder that the most profound changes often come from the simplest of gestures. And with that knowledge, he embraced the future, ready to continue his journey, one act of kindness at a time.